There is a difference between being smart and being dangerously intelligent. A smart person can answer questions, pass exams, and speak well in conversations. But a dangerously intelligent person can see what others cannot see, understand what others ignore, and act in ways that shift outcomes in their favor, even before others realize what is happening. This kind of intelligence is not about arrogance or superiority. It is about clarity. It is about awareness so sharp that confusion becomes rare. It is about thinking in layers, while most people think in straight lines. In the real world, survival, success, and influence are rarely decided by effort alone. They are decided by perception, timing, emotional control, and depth of thinking. A dangerously intelligent mind does not get trapped easily. It questions assumptions. It notices patterns in human behavior, systems, and consequences. While most people react to life, this kind of intelligence learns to respond with precision instead of emotion. It does not rush into decisions because it understands that speed without clarity creates repeated failure. In reality, intelligence is not fixed. It is shaped. It is trained through attention, discipline, exposure, and reflection. The brain becomes sharper when it is forced to think beyond comfort, when it is trained to observe instead of assume, and when it is taught to learn from reality rather than imagination. Most people live in mental autopilot. They repeat habits, accept opinions, and follow patterns without questioning whether those patterns actually benefit them. Dangerous intelligence begins when this autopilot is broken. The moment a person starts asking why things work instead of just how to do them, their thinking begins to evolve. This journey is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming aware. Awareness of your own thinking is the first level of real intelligence. Without it, a person can have knowledge but still make poor decisions. With it, even simple knowledge becomes powerful because it is applied correctly. A dangerously intelligent person understands that information is everywhere, but understanding is rare. Books, internet, teachers, and experiences all provide data. But intelligence is what you do with that data. It is how you connect it, filter it, and apply it in real situations where outcomes matter. There is also a hidden side to intelligence that many ignore. Emotional intelligence, psychological awareness, and self-control often determine success more than raw thinking ability. A person who cannot control emotions will waste intelligence through impulsive decisions. A person who understands human psychology can navigate situations that others find confusing or overwhelming. This book will explore how intelligence develops in real-life conditions, not in fantasy. It will not promote shortcuts or illusions. Instead, it will focus on mental training, observation skills, deep thinking habits, learning acceleration, and real-world application. Each chapter will build a layer of thinking that slowly transforms how you process reality. Becoming dangerously intelligent does not mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means becoming precise. It means reducing mental noise. It means learning to see truth, even when it is uncomfortable. And most importantly, it means building a mind that cannot easily be misled by emotion, pressure, or misinformation. The path ahead requires honesty. Not everyone wants to think deeply, because deep thinking demands responsibility. When you understand more, you cannot pretend ignorance. When you see more clearly, excuses lose power. That is why intelligence feels dangerous to those who are not prepared for it. It removes illusions. If you continue through this book, you will begin to notice changes in how you observe people, how you interpret situations, and how you make decisions. You will start to see patterns instead of isolated events. You will start to understand that most outcomes in life are predictable once you understand the underlying structure behind them. This is not just about becoming smarter. It is about becoming mentally awake in a world that encourages distraction, speed, and shallow thinking. The journey begins from one simple shift, learning to think instead of just reacting. Chapter 1. The Collapse of Mental Autopilot. Most people do not think in the way they believe they do. They assume their thoughts are independent, logical, and self-directed, but in reality, much of their thinking is automatic. It is shaped by repetition, environment, emotion, and habit. This automatic mode is what can be called mental autopilot, and it is the first barrier between ordinary intelligence and dangerously intelligent thinking. Mental autopilot is not laziness. It is efficiency. The brain is designed to conserve energy, so it creates shortcuts for common decisions. Over time, these shortcuts become patterns. These patterns decide how a person reacts to criticism, how they interpret success, how they judge others, and how they make decisions under pressure. The problem is not the existence of autopilot itself. The problem is living entirely inside it without awareness. A person on autopilot often confuses familiarity with truth. If they have seen something repeated often enough, they assume it is correct. If they have heard an opinion many times, they begin to believe it without testing it. This is how weak thinking forms. It does not come from lack of intelligence, but from lack of interruption. The mind was never trained to stop and question its own process. Dangerously intelligent thinking begins at the moment autopilot is interrupted. This interruption usually feels uncomfortable because it creates mental friction. Suddenly, things that once felt certain become uncertain. Decisions that once felt easy now require reflection. But this discomfort is not a weakness. It is the beginning of clarity. A person begins to grow intellectually when they start observing their own thinking as if it belongs to someone else. Instead of immediately reacting to situations, they pause internally and ask why they are reacting in that specific way. This shift transforms thinking from automatic reaction into conscious analysis. It creates distance between stimulus and response, and that distance is where intelligence develops. In real life, autopilot shows itself in many subtle ways. People repeat opinions they never verified. They follow advice without understanding the logic behind it. They enter situations based on emotion and only later try to justify their decisions. These patterns create cycles of repeated mistakes that feel different on the surface but are identical in structure. Breaking autopilot requires honesty more than knowledge. A person must be willing to admit that many of their thoughts are not original. They are inherited from surroundings, culture, friends, and past experiences. Once this realization happens, thinking becomes more flexible. The mind stops defending every belief and starts evaluating it instead. Another important aspect of mental autopilot is emotional reaction. When people are triggered emotionally, they often lose access to deep thinking. Anger, fear, excitement, and insecurity compress thinking speed and reduce clarity. On autopilot, emotions directly control actions. In conscious intelligence, emotions are observed but not obeyed immediately. They are processed before response. A dangerously intelligent person does not eliminate emotion. That is impossible and unnatural. Instead, they learn to create a gap between emotion and action. In that gap, reasoning can enter. This allows decisions to be shaped by awareness instead of impulse. One of the strongest signs that someone is escaping autopilot is when they start questioning simple things they previously accepted without thought. They begin to notice contradictions in common beliefs. They start to see how systems influence behavior. They stop assuming that repetition equals truth. This does not make them rebellious. It makes them precise. Over time, this mental shift changes how reality is experienced. Life stops feeling random and starts feeling structured. Events that once seemed chaotic begin to reveal patterns. Human behavior becomes more predictable. Decisions become less emotional and more strategic. This is the foundation of dangerously intelligent thinking. The collapse of mental autopilot is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process. The mind will always try to return to shortcuts because shortcuts are comfortable. That is why intelligence is not just about insight, but also about discipline. Every time a person chooses reflection over reaction, they strengthen conscious thinking. There is also a hidden challenge. When autopilot begins to break, a person may temporarily feel less confident because certainty decreases before clarity fully develops. Old beliefs weaken faster than new understanding forms. This stage feels like confusion, but it is actually restructuring. The mind is reorganizing itself to think at a deeper level. In this phase, many people stop growing because they mistake confusion for failure. But dangerously intelligent individuals understand that confusion is often the price of upgrading perception. It is the signal that old mental models are no longer sufficient. Ultimately, escaping autopilot is not about becoming over-analytical or slow in action. It is about developing control over attention. When attention is controlled, thinking becomes deliberate. When thinking becomes deliberate, decisions become accurate. And when decisions become accurate consistently, intelligence becomes powerful in a real and practical sense. The first step toward becoming dangerously intelligent is simple in theory, but difficult in practice. Stop assuming your first thought. Chapter 2. Attention is the first form of intelligence. If mental autopilot is the first barrier to clear thinking, then scattered attention is the second. A person cannot become dangerously intelligent if their attention is constantly fragmented. Intelligence does not grow in chaos. It grows in focus. Attention is not just about looking at something. It is about what the mind selects, what it ignores, and what it returns to repeatedly. Whatever receives your attention repeatedly begins to shape your thinking. Over time, attention becomes identity. What you consistently focus on eventually defines how you interpret reality. Most people underestimate how easily attention is stolen. Modern life is built around interruptions. Notifications, conversations, entertainment, and endless streams of information constantly pull the mind in different directions. When attention is divided, thinking becomes shallow. When thinking becomes shallow, decisions become reactive instead of strategic. Dangerously intelligent thinking begins when a person realizes that attention is not free. It is the most valuable currency of the mind. Whoever controls attention controls the direction of thought. If you cannot control your attention, you cannot control your intelligence, because intelligence depends on sustained observation and deep processing. A scattered mind does not build understanding. It only collects fragments. These fragments feel like knowledge, but they do not connect into insight. True intelligence comes when information is held long enough in the mind to be processed, compared, and structured. Without attention, information passes through the mind without transforming it. There is also a deeper truth. Attention determines depth. When attention is shallow, understanding is shallow. When attention is deep, understanding becomes layered. Most people stop at surface interpretation because their attention shifts too quickly. They read, watch, or listen, but they do not stay long enough with the idea to fully absorb it. Dangerously intelligent individuals train themselves to resist unnecessary distraction, not by rejecting the world, but by choosing deliberately what deserves mental space. This creates mental silence where real thinking can occur. In that silence, patterns become visible that are impossible to see in noise. In real life, attention is constantly being traded. Every app, every conversation, every environment competes for it. The person who wins this battle is not the one with more information, but the one who can stay focused long enough to extract meaning from information. There is a common misconception that intelligence is about speed. In reality, deep intelligence is often slow. It takes time to fully understand a situation, especially complex human behavior or complex systems. A mind that rushes through understanding only creates assumptions. A mind that stays with a problem long enough begins to see structure. Attention also shapes memory. The mind does not store everything equally. It stores what it focuses on with emotional or intellectual weight. This is why people remember what they deeply care about and forget what they only casually encounter. Focus creates memory, and memory creates intelligence over time. One of the strongest signs of developing intelligence is the ability to hold a single idea in mind without escaping to distraction. At first, this feels difficult because the mind is used to constant stimulation. But with practice, attention becomes stronger and thinking becomes more stable. There is also a psychological dimension to attention. Whatever a person repeatedly focuses on begins to influence their emotional state. Constant focus on negative environments creates a negative interpretation of life. Constant focus on growth creates a more constructive mindset. Attention does not just shape thought, it shapes perception. A dangerously intelligent person understands that control of attention is control of mental direction. They do not allow random inputs to shape their thinking without evaluation. They choose what enters their mind carefully because they understand that every input influences output. In practice, training attention is not about extreme isolation. It is about intentional engagement. It means when reading, actually reading. When listening, actually listening. When thinking, not splitting the mind into multiple directions at once. It is about full presence with one mental task at a time. Another important realization is that distraction often feels like comfort. Switching attention gives the illusion of progress because the mind experiences novelty. But novelty is not depth. Constant switching prevents the mind from reaching deeper understanding. Intelligence requires staying longer than comfort suggests. Over time, as attention becomes more controlled, thinking becomes sharper. The mind starts noticing details that were previously invisible. Situations become easier to analyze. Decisions become more stable because they are based on deeper processing rather than surface reaction. This is where intelligence begins to feel dangerous in a practical sense. A focused mind sees through confusion faster. It recognizes patterns earlier. It is less likely to be misled by noise or emotional manipulation. Not because it knows everything, but because it observes everything more carefully. The development of attention is not a temporary skill. It is a lifelong discipline. Every environment will test it. Every distraction will attempt to pull it away. But every moment of regained focus strengthens mental structure. Ultimately, attention is the gateway to intelligence. Without it, knowledge remains fragmented. With it, knowledge becomes structured understanding. And structured understanding is what separates average thinking from dangerously intelligent thinking. Chapter 3. Observation is the skill that separates thinking from knowing. Most people believe intelligence is about how much they know. In reality, intelligence is more about how clearly they observe. Knowledge is just stored information. Observation is the process that turns reality into understanding. Without observation, knowledge remains disconnected and useless in real situations. Dangerously intelligent thinking begins when a person stops rushing to conclusions and starts studying reality before interpreting it. Observation is not passive looking. It is active noticing. It means the mind slows down enough to detect details that others ignore, especially patterns that repeat quietly over time. The average mind reacts to outcomes. The intelligent mind studies causes. Between cause and outcome lies a space where most people never look. That space contains behavior patterns, emotional triggers, system rules, and hidden structures. Observation is the ability to stay in that space long enough to understand how things actually work. A person who does not observe deeply is always surprised by life. They call events random because they never studied the conditions that created those events. But a person trained in observation rarely experiences true randomness. They see preparation before outcome. They see behavior before action. They see pattern before repetition becomes obvious. One of the most important shifts in intelligence is moving from assumption to observation. Assumption is fast, but often incorrect. Observation is slower, but accurate. Most mistakes in life come from assuming understanding without actually studying what is happening. Dangerous intelligence removes this habit and replaces it with careful noticing. Observation also changes how people are understood. Instead of labeling someone quickly, an observing mind watches behavior across time. It notices consistency and contradiction. It sees how people act under pressure versus comfort. It recognizes that people are not fixed, but patterned in their responses. In real life, observation is what allows better decisions. When someone can accurately read a situation, they do not need excessive advice. They already see enough to act wisely. This reduces dependence on others and increases mental independence. That independence is a key trait of dangerously intelligent individuals. There is also a hidden layer in observation. Most people observe only what is obvious. But intelligence grows when a person begins to observe what is not being said, what is being avoided, and what is being repeated indirectly. These subtle signals often reveal more truth than direct information. For example, in conversations, people often focus on words. But observation includes tone, timing, hesitation, and emotional shifts. These small details reveal intent and meaning more accurately than spoken sentences alone. A person trained in observation learns to read between actions, not just words. Another critical aspect is self-observation. A person cannot understand the outside world clearly if they cannot observe themselves. Self-observation means noticing your own emotional reactions, thought patterns, and decision habits in real time. This creates awareness of internal bias, which is often the biggest distortion in judgment. Without self-observation, a person repeats the same mental errors without realizing it. They believe they are making new decisions, but they are actually repeating old patterns in new situations. Observation breaks this cycle by making behavior visible to the mind itself. Dangerously intelligent people develop a habit of delayed interpretation. Instead of instantly assigning meaning to events, they first collect enough details. They let information sit long enough to reveal structure. This prevents emotional bias from shaping understanding too early. Over time, observation becomes automatic. The mind starts noticing changes in behavior, environment, and systems without conscious effort. This creates a form of situational awareness where fewer things feel unexpected. Life becomes more predictable, not because it changes, but because understanding improves. There is also a practical advantage. People who observe well make fewer unnecessary mistakes. They recognize risks earlier. They understand opportunities more clearly. They avoid emotional traps because they see patterns before they fully unfold. This reduces wasted effort and increases precision in action. One important truth is that observation requires patience. A mind that is always rushing cannot observe deeply. Speed destroys detail. That is why dangerously intelligent thinking often appears calm. Calmness is not lack of thought. It is controlled attention directed toward reality without interruption. As observation improves, thinking becomes more structured. Instead of random reactions, the mind begins forming logical connections between events. It starts asking not just what is happening, but how and why it is happening. This transforms intelligence from passive knowledge into active understanding. Eventually, Observation creates a shift in perception itself. Life stops appearing as a series of isolated moments and starts appearing as a connected system. Patterns become visible in behavior, in outcomes, and even in personal experiences. This is the stage where intelligence begins to feel powerful because clarity replaces confusion. The foundation of dangerously intelligent thinking is simple. Do not trust first impressions. Do not rely on surface information. Observe longer than comfort suggests. Look deeper than obvious explanations. And allow reality to reveal itself before forming conclusions. Because in the end, intelligence is not about seeing more things. It is about seeing things more clearly. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Deep Thinking. Observation shows you reality as it is, but deep thinking is what transforms that reality into understanding you can use. Many people observe life, but still do not become intelligent because they never process what they see. They collect experiences, opinions, and information, but they do not build structure from it. Deep thinking is the process that turns scattered input into organized intelligence. Dangerously intelligent people are not those who think about more things. They are those who think about fewer things, but at a deeper level. Instead of moving quickly from idea to idea, they stay with one idea long enough to uncover its layers. This is where real mental power develops, not in quantity of thoughts, but in quality of processing. Most thinking in daily life is shallow. It stays on the surface of problems and situations. A person sees an event and immediately assigns meaning without examining the structure behind it. This creates illusion of understanding. It feels like clarity, but it is actually mental speed without depth. Deep thinking begins when the mind refuses to accept surface explanations. It asks what is underneath the visible layer. It questions assumptions. It slows down interpretation. Instead of reacting to what something appears to be, it investigates what causes it to be that way. A dangerously intelligent mind treats ideas like systems. Every situation has components, relationships, and patterns. Nothing exists in isolation. When something happens, it is not treated as a single event, but as a result of multiple interacting factors. This systems-based thinking is what separates deep intelligence from ordinary reasoning. For example, when most people see failure, they see a single outcome. A deep thinker sees a chain of decisions, habits, timing, environment, and emotional states that created that outcome. This does not just explain failure, it reveals how to change it. That is the difference between understanding and insight. Another key part of deep thinking is resistance to instant conclusions. The human mind naturally wants closure. It wants to label things quickly so it can move on. But dangerously intelligent thinking delays closure. It holds uncertainty longer. It allows multiple interpretations to exist at the same time until evidence becomes clear. This mental patience creates accuracy. When conclusions are not rushed, they are more aligned with reality. And when conclusions are aligned with reality, decisions become more effective. Most errors in judgment come not from lack of information, but from premature certainty. Deep thinking also requires mental layering. This means understanding something at multiple levels at once. A shallow thinker sees only what something is. A deeper thinker understands how it works, why it works, and what influences it. Each layer adds more control over understanding. At the first level, there is description. At the second level, there is mechanism. At the third level, there is causation. Dangerously intelligent minds move through these levels naturally. They do not stay at description. They move toward structure and cause, because that is where real power exists. Another important aspect is internal dialogue. Deep thinking is often silent conversation within the mind. It involves questioning, testing, and refining ideas internally before they are expressed externally. This prevents weak ideas from becoming spoken conclusions. It creates mental discipline where thoughts are refined before they are shared. However, deep thinking is not constant mental activity. It also includes stillness. Many insights appear not during active thinking, but after thinking is paused. This happens because the mind continues processing information subconsciously. When unnecessary noise is removed, deeper connections become visible. Dangerously intelligent individuals understand this balance. They do not force thinking continuously. They think deeply when needed, and then allow space for processing. This rhythm creates sharper insight than constant mental effort without rest. Another critical element of deep thinking is contradiction awareness. Most people avoid contradictions because they feel uncomfortable. But intelligence grows when contradictions are examined instead of ignored. When two ideas seem to conflict, a shallow mind chooses one. A deep mind investigates how both might be partially true or context-dependent. This ability prevents rigid thinking. It allows flexibility without losing clarity. It also reduces the risk of being trapped in fixed beliefs that do not adapt to new information. In a changing world, mental flexibility is a form of strength. Over time, deep thinking changes how problems are experienced. Problems stop feeling overwhelming because they are broken into understandable parts. Complexity becomes manageable when it is structured. Confusion decreases not because life becomes simpler, but because thinking becomes more organized. There is also a strong connection between deep thinking and emotional control. Shallow thinking amplifies emotional reaction because it reacts immediately to surface meaning. Deep thinking slows emotional response because it introduces analysis before reaction. This creates stability in decision making even under pressure. A dangerously intelligent person is not someone who avoids problems. It is someone who can enter complexity without losing clarity. They do not panic when situations are unclear because their mind is trained to search for structure instead of reacting to chaos. Eventually, deep thinking becomes a habit rather than an effort. The mind automatically looks for underlying patterns instead of accepting surface information. It starts to naturally ask better questions, and better questions lead to better understanding without forcing answers. The architecture of deep thinking is simple in principle, but powerful in effect. Slow down interpretation. Break complexity into structure. Resist premature conclusions. And always look for the system behind the event. Because intelligence is not defined by how quickly you understand something. It is defined by how accurately you understand what others overlook. Chapter 5: Learning is a weapon, not a habit. Most people think learning is something you do in school, or during specific moments of study. They treat it like a task with a beginning and an end. But dangerously intelligent individuals see learning differently. For them, learning is not an activity. It is a permanent operating system. The difference between average intelligence and dangerous intelligence is not how much someone has learned in the past, but how fast and how accurately they can learn in the present. Real intelligence is not stored in memory alone. It is stored in adaptability. A person can collect knowledge for years and still fail in real situations if they cannot apply it correctly under changing conditions. This is because information alone does not create intelligence. Integration does. Learning becomes powerful only when it changes how a person thinks, not just what they know. Dangerously intelligent people treat every experience as raw data. They do not divide life into learning time and living time. Everything becomes material for understanding. Conversations, mistakes, success, discomfort, and even failure are all interpreted as feedback from reality. Most people repeat the same errors because they do not extract meaning from their experiences. They live through events but do not process them. The experience passes through their mind without restructuring their thinking. This creates repetition of the same outcomes with different appearances. Learning becomes dangerous when it stops being passive. Passive learning is when information is received without challenge or testing. Active learning is when information is questioned, applied, and stress-tested in real situations. Only active learning produces intelligence that survives reality. A key trait of dangerously intelligent minds is selective learning. They do not try to learn everything. They focus on learning what has structural impact. Structural knowledge is knowledge that changes how multiple other things are understood. For example, understanding human behavior patterns can improve communication, decision-making, and negotiation simultaneously. Another important shift is from memorization to comprehension. Memorization stores facts. Comprehension builds models. A model is a mental structure that explains how something works. Once a model is built, it can be used repeatedly across different situations without needing to relearn everything from scratch. This is why some people can solve new problems easily, while others struggle even with familiar situations. The difference is not exposure. It is whether they have built mental models or only collected isolated facts. Dangerously intelligent individuals also understand the importance of unlearning. Many mental limitations are not caused by lack of knowledge, but by outdated knowledge that no longer fits reality. To learn new structures, old assumptions often need to be dismantled first. This process can feel uncomfortable because it challenges identity and certainty. However, refusing to unlearn creates rigidity. A rigid mind resists new information if it conflicts with existing beliefs. This leads to intellectual stagnation, even when new information is available. Flexibility in thinking requires the willingness to replace outdated understanding with better models. Learning also becomes more powerful when it is connected to feedback. Feedback is reality's correction mechanism. It shows whether understanding is accurate or not. Dangerous intelligence grows faster because it pays attention to feedback instead of ignoring it or defending against it. For example, when a strategy fails, an average thinker may blame external conditions. A dangerously intelligent thinker studies the failure itself. They ask what assumption was incorrect, what pattern was missed, and what adjustment is needed. This turns failure into refinement instead of discouragement. Another important aspect is speed of correction. Intelligence is not only about making fewer mistakes, but also about correcting mistakes faster. The faster a person adjusts their thinking after new evidence appears, the more accurate their understanding becomes over time. Learning also becomes strategic when applied with intention. Instead of learning randomly, dangerously intelligent people align learning with specific goals. They understand that attention and time are limited resources, so they invest them in knowledge that increases leverage in real situations. There is also a psychological barrier to learning that many people do not recognize. The mind prefers familiar thinking patterns because they feel safe. New ideas often feel uncomfortable because they disrupt existing mental structure. This resistance is often mistaken for lack of ability, but it is actually resistance to change. Overcoming this resistance is part of developing intelligence. A mind that can tolerate discomfort during learning expands faster than a mind that avoids it. Growth often requires temporary confusion before clarity appears. Eventually, learning becomes effortless, not because it becomes easy, but because resistance decreases. The mind becomes trained to absorb, test, and adjust continuously. At this stage, learning is no longer an effort. It becomes a natural response to life itself. Dangerously intelligent individuals do not separate learning from action. They learn by doing and improve by reflecting. This cycle creates constant refinement. Knowledge is never static. It evolves with experience. The final shift in this chapter is understanding that intelligence is not what you know, but how quickly your understanding improves when reality challenges it. The real weapon is not information. It is the ability to upgrade thinking continuously. Because in the real world, the strongest mind is not the one with the most knowledge, but the one that learns the fastest when knowledge becomes. Chapter 6. Emotional control as the hidden core of intelligence. Most people think intelligence is a matter of thinking power, logic, or knowledge. But in real life, intelligence collapses most often, not because of lack of information, but because of lack of emotional control. A person can understand everything correctly in theory and still make completely wrong decisions under emotional pressure. Dangerously intelligent thinking requires a different relationship with emotion. Not suppression, not avoidance, but control through awareness. Emotions are not enemies of intelligence. They are signals. The problem begins when signals start driving decisions instead of informing them. When emotion takes control, thinking becomes distorted. Fear exaggerates risk. Anger reduces patience. Excitement creates overconfidence. Insecurity leads to hesitation. In all these states, perception becomes biased, and biased perception produces flawed decisions. This is why many failures are not failures of ability, but failures of emotional regulation. A dangerously intelligent mind creates a separation between feeling and action. It allows emotions to exist without letting them immediately dictate behavior. This separation creates space for reasoning to enter. In that space, decisions become deliberate instead of reactive. Most people live in emotional reaction loops. Something happens, they feel, then they act instantly. After acting, they justify their behavior. This sequence feels natural, but it is one of the weakest forms of thinking. It removes choice from the process. Intelligence begins when this sequence is reversed into observation, interpretation, and then action. Emotional control is not about becoming emotionless. That is neither realistic nor desirable. Emotions are part of human intelligence. They provide energy, motivation, and social awareness. The goal is not removal of emotion, but governance of emotion. A controlled mind uses emotion as input, not instruction. One of the strongest signs of emotional weakness is urgency without clarity. When a person feels they must respond immediately, they often sacrifice accuracy for speed. Dangerous intelligence replaces urgency with evaluation. Not every situation requires instant reaction. Many situations improve when time is used to understand rather than respond. Another key aspect of emotional intelligence is understanding triggers. A trigger is a situation that consistently produces an automatic emotional response. Most people are unaware of their triggers, which means they are predictable in stressful conditions. Once a person identifies their triggers, they gain the ability to interrupt automatic reactions. Self-awareness plays a central role here. A person must observe their emotional patterns in real time. Not after the fact, but during the experience itself. This is where true control begins. When emotion is recognized as it arises, it loses its power to fully dominate behavior. Dangerously intelligent individuals also understand that emotions are often amplified by interpretation. Events themselves are neutral. Meaning is assigned by the mind. Two people can experience the same situation and react completely differently because their interpretations differ. Changing interpretation changes emotional response. For example, failure can be interpreted as loss or as feedback. In the first interpretation, emotion becomes discouragement. In the second, emotion becomes learning pressure. The event does not change. Only the mental framing changes. This is where intelligence directly influences emotional stability. Another important concept is emotional delay. This is the practice of not acting immediately on strong emotional states. Instead, the emotion is allowed to settle before decisions are made. This delay prevents irreversible mistakes that often occur in heated moments. Many intelligent decisions are simply delayed reactions filtered through calm thinking. Over time, emotional control creates consistency in behavior. Instead of fluctuating between extremes, a person becomes stable under pressure. This stability is not weakness. It is strength. Because in unpredictable environments, stability is what allows clear judgment. There is also a deeper layer to emotional intelligence that involves understanding other people. Human behavior is often driven more by emotion than logic. A dangerously intelligent person recognizes emotional patterns in others and adjusts communication accordingly. This does not mean manipulation. It means awareness of how people actually process information. When you understand emotional states, you understand behavior. And when you understand behavior, you can predict reactions more accurately. This predictive awareness is a major component of real-world intelligence because most outcomes in life depend on human decisions. However, emotional intelligence must also include self-discipline. Awareness without control is incomplete. A person may understand their emotions, but still act on them impulsively if discipline is weak. Discipline is what enforces awareness in real situations. One of the hardest skills to develop is staying calm during uncertainty. The mind naturally seeks closure when things are unclear. But uncertainty is often where the most important decisions exist. Emotional control allows a person to remain functional, even when clarity is not immediately available. Dangerously intelligent thinking thrives in uncertainty because it does not depend on emotional certainty to act. It depends on structured understanding. Even partial clarity, when properly analyzed, is enough to make effective decisions if emotions are not interfering. Eventually, emotional control reshapes identity. A person stops seeing themselves as someone who reacts and starts seeing themselves as someone who chooses. This shift is subtle but powerful. It transforms behavior from automatic to intentional. The final truth of this chapter is simple. Intelligence without emotional control is unstable. It can produce insight, but not consistent results. But intelligence combined with emotional discipline becomes reliable in real-life conditions. Because in the real world, the strongest mind is not the one that feels the least, but the one that remains clearest when feeling the most. Chapter 7. Pattern Recognition and the Invisible Structure of Reality. Reality does not present itself randomly, even though it often appears chaotic to an untrained mind. What looks like confusion is usually structure that has not yet been recognized. Dangerously intelligent thinking begins when a person starts seeing patterns where others see only isolated events. Pattern recognition is not about guessing. It is about observing repeated relationships between events, behaviors, and outcomes over time. When enough repetition is noticed, the mind begins to form a model. That model allows prediction, and prediction is one of the strongest signs of real intelligence. Most people experience life as disconnected moments. They treat each situation as new, even when it is not. Because of this, they are repeatedly surprised by outcomes that were actually predictable. A person who cannot see patterns is forced to react every time. A person who sees patterns begins to anticipate. Dangerously intelligent individuals train themselves to look beyond surface differences and focus on underlying similarities. Two situations may look completely different on the outside, but the structure behind them may be the same. Recognizing that hidden similarity is where intelligence becomes powerful. For example, human behavior often repeats in cycles. People respond to reward, pressure, fear, and validation in predictable ways. While the details change, the underlying emotional drivers remain stable. A person who understands these patterns can better navigate relationships, communication, and decision-making. Pattern recognition also applies to systems. Every system, whether social, financial, or personal, operates based on rules and constraints. When a person understands these rules, They can predict how the system will behave under different conditions. Without this understanding, people feel like systems are unpredictable, when in reality, they are simply not understood deeply enough. A key shift in thinking happens when the mind stops focusing on events and starts focusing on sequences. An event is just a moment. A sequence reveals direction. Direction reveals pattern. And pattern reveals predictability. This is how intelligence moves from reaction to anticipation. One of the strongest traits of dangerously intelligent minds is the ability to identify repetition early. They do not wait for patterns to fully form before noticing them. They detect small signals that suggest something is recurring. This early detection allows them to adjust thinking before others even realize change is happening. However, pattern recognition requires patience. Patterns are not visible in single moments. They require time and comparison. This means the mind must store observations and connect them across experiences. Without memory and attention working together, patterns remain invisible. Another important aspect is avoiding false patterns. The human mind is naturally inclined to find meaning even where none exists. This can lead to incorrect assumptions if observation is not careful. Dangerous intelligence requires discipline in distinguishing real patterns from random coincidence. This is why evidence over time is critical. One or two events are not enough to confirm a pattern. Repetition across different conditions strengthens reliability. The more consistent the relationship, the stronger the pattern becomes. Pattern recognition also enhances decision-making speed. When a situation resembles a previously observed pattern, the mind does not need to fully reanalyze it. It can draw from existing understanding. This reduces cognitive load and increases accuracy under pressure. In real life, this skill becomes extremely powerful. A person who recognizes behavioral patterns can anticipate reactions in conversations. A person who recognizes system patterns can anticipate outcomes in planning and strategy. A person who recognizes personal patterns can identify their own repeated mistakes before they happen again. There is also a deeper level of pattern recognition that involves understanding timing. Not all patterns are about what happens. Some are about when things happen. Timing patterns are often the difference between success and failure in many real-world situations. Recognizing cycles, delays, and progression stages allows better alignment with reality. Over time, pattern recognition creates a shift in perception. Life stops feeling random and starts feeling structured. This does not mean everything becomes predictable, but enough becomes understandable that confusion reduces significantly. Dangerously intelligent thinking does not rely on certainty. It relies on probability-based understanding formed from patterns. This means decisions are not made with absolute confidence, but with structured awareness of likely outcomes. This form of thinking also reduces emotional instability. When patterns are understood, surprises decrease. And when surprises decrease, emotional reactions become more controlled. Uncertainty loses its power because the mind has reference points for interpretation. Another important aspect is that pattern recognition must remain flexible. Patterns can evolve over time. What was true in one context may not remain true forever. Intelligence requires updating patterns when new information appears. Sticking to outdated patterns leads to incorrect conclusions. This is why dangerously intelligent individuals constantly refine their models of understanding. They do not treat patterns as fixed truth. They treat them as evolving structures that must be updated with experience. Eventually, pattern recognition becomes automatic. The mind begins to notice repetition without conscious effort. It starts connecting dots across time, behavior, and systems naturally. At this stage, intelligence becomes faster and more adaptive. The final insight of this chapter is simple but powerful. Reality is not random. It is structured. And intelligence is the ability to perceive that structure clearly enough to act before others even realize. Chapter 8. Strategic Thinking and Mental Positioning. At a certain level of intelligence, thinking is no longer just about understanding reality. It becomes about positioning yourself inside it. This is where dangerously intelligent thinking moves beyond observation and pattern recognition into strategy. Strategic thinking is the ability to see not only what is happening, but what will happen if different actions are taken. It is mental simulation. Instead of reacting to life step by step, a strategic mind runs multiple possible futures in advance and chooses actions that lead toward the most favorable outcome. Most people live inside immediate consequences. They act and then deal with results as they come. This creates a reactive life where decisions are made under pressure. Strategic thinkers reduce pressure by thinking ahead. They bring future consequences into present awareness before acting. Dangerously intelligent individuals understand that every action has a chain reaction. A single decision can create multiple downstream effects. Strategic thinking is about mapping those effects before committing to action. This reduces regret and increases control over outcomes. One of the most important aspects of strategy is positioning. Positioning means placing yourself in a situation where success becomes easier and failure becomes less likely. Instead of relying on effort alone, strategic minds adjust environment, timing, and conditions to improve probability of success. For example, in conversations, positioning means choosing when to speak, what to say, and when silence is more powerful. In learning, it means focusing on subjects that create leverage across multiple areas instead of random information. In decision-making, it means choosing options that have long-term stability rather than short-term satisfaction. Most people underestimate positioning because they focus only on effort. They believe working harder automatically leads to better outcomes. But intelligence shows that effort without positioning often produces limited results. Proper positioning can multiply the impact of even moderate effort. Strategic thinking also involves understanding constraints. Every situation has limitations such as time, resources, knowledge, and environment. Instead of ignoring constraints, a strategic mind uses them as part of planning. Constraints are not obstacles only. They are structure that shapes possible outcomes. Another key element is anticipation. Anticipation is the ability to predict how others or systems will behave in response to certain actions. This does not require certainty. It requires understanding patterns, incentives, and behavior tendencies. With enough awareness, outcomes become less surprising. Dangerously intelligent thinking also avoids emotional interference in strategy. Emotional decisions often prioritize immediate relief over long-term benefit. Strategic decisions prioritize structure over impulse. This does not mean ignoring emotion, but ensuring emotion does not override reasoning. One of the strongest habits in strategic minds is scenario thinking. Instead of believing one outcome will happen, they consider multiple possibilities. What happens if things go well? What happens if they go poorly? And what happens if they remain uncertain? This prepares the mind for adaptability instead of shock. Adaptability is a major part of strategy. No plan survives perfectly in reality. Conditions change, people react differently than expected, and new information appears. Strategic intelligence is not about perfect planning. It is about flexible planning that can adjust without collapse. Another important concept is leverage. Leverage means achieving greater results with less effort by using structure, timing, or knowledge. Strategic thinkers always look for leverage points in systems. These are small inputs that produce large outputs. Identifying leverage is one of the highest forms of intelligence application. In real life, leverage can come from communication, timing, relationships, skills, or understanding systems. A small change in approach can sometimes produce a large shift in outcome if applied at the right point in the system. Strategic thinking also requires emotional patience. Many opportunities fail not because they are weak, but because people act too early or too late. Timing is often more important than intensity. Waiting for the right moment is a strategic skill that requires control and confidence. Dangerously intelligent individuals also think in terms of trade-offs. Every decision gives something and takes something. Nothing is free. Strategic thinking evaluates what is gained and what is lost before choosing action. This prevents hidden costs from becoming surprises later. Over time, strategic thinking changes how life is experienced. Instead of feeling like a series of reactions, life begins to feel like a field of options. The mind becomes less reactive and more directional. Decisions become less emotional and more structured. There is also a deeper psychological shift. A person stops feeling controlled by circumstances and starts feeling like a participant in shaping them. This does not mean total control over life, but increased influence over direction and outcomes. Eventually, strategic thinking becomes natural. The mind automatically considers consequences, timing, and positioning before acting. This creates consistency in results, even when conditions are unpredictable. The core idea of this chapter is simple. Intelligence is not just understanding reality. It is learning how to place yourself within reality in a way that improves your outcome. Chapter 9. Psychological Awareness and Understanding Human Behavior. At a deeper level of intelligence, understanding reality is not enough. You must also understand the minds that interpret reality. Most outcomes in life are shaped not by logic alone, but by human behavior. This is why psychological awareness becomes a core pillar of dangerously intelligent thinking. Psychological awareness is the ability to recognize how people think, feel, decide, and justify their actions. It is not about labeling people quickly. It is about observing behavior patterns over time and understanding the internal drivers behind those behaviors. Most people assume others think in a rational and consistent way. In reality, human thinking is heavily influenced by emotion, bias, insecurity, desire, and social pressure. Because of this, behavior is often more predictable than it appears once you understand the underlying psychological structure. Dangerously intelligent individuals do not just listen to what people say. They analyze why it is being said. Words are often surface expressions of deeper emotional or psychological needs. A statement may appear logical, but its origin may be emotional protection, validation seeking, fear, or control. One of the most important psychological insights is that people rarely act against their perceived self-interest. However, perception of self-interest is often distorted. People may choose short-term comfort over long-term benefit or emotional relief over logical advantage. Understanding this gap between perception and reality is key to predicting behavior. Another critical aspect is that people are driven by emotional states more than arguments. Logical reasoning is often used after decisions are already made as justification rather than true motivation. This means that influencing understanding requires awareness of emotional context, not just facts. Dangerously intelligent thinking involves observing consistency in behavior rather than isolated actions. A single action does not define a person. Repeated patterns do. Over time, individuals reveal predictable tendencies in how they respond to pressure, reward, criticism, and uncertainty. One of the strongest psychological patterns is the need for validation. Many decisions are influenced by the desire to be accepted, respected, or seen in a certain way. This can shape choices in communication, career, relationships, and even personal beliefs. Another major pattern is avoidance behavior. People often avoid discomfort, uncertainty, or emotional risk. This avoidance can silently shape life decisions. Recognizing what someone consistently avoids can reveal more about them than what they openly pursue. Psychological awareness also includes understanding projection. People often interpret others based on their own internal state. Insecure thinking can interpret neutral behavior as negative. Confident thinking can interpret challenges as opportunities. This means perception is not purely external. It is filtered through internal psychology. Dangerously intelligent individuals use this understanding to remain more objective. They do not immediately accept interpretations, including their own. They question whether perception is influenced by emotion, bias, or assumption. Another important layer is understanding incentives. Behavior is strongly shaped by what people gain or lose from their actions. Even subtle incentives can influence decisions more than stated beliefs. When you understand incentives, you begin to understand predictable behavior patterns. In communication, psychological awareness allows better interpretation of meaning beyond words. Tone, hesitation, repetition, and emotional shifts all carry information. What is not said is often as important as what is said. However, psychological awareness must not turn into judgmental thinking. The goal is not to categorize people harshly, but to understand behavior clearly. Misuse of psychological insight can lead to overthinking or unnecessary suspicion. True intelligence remains balanced and grounded. A dangerously intelligent mind also studies itself psychologically. Self-awareness is critical because personal biases often distort interpretation of others. Understanding your own emotional triggers, insecurities, and assumptions improves accuracy in external judgment. Over time, psychological awareness creates a form of clarity in social situations. Interactions become easier to navigate because behavior becomes more predictable. Confusion in relationships and communication decreases as understanding improves. Another important realization is that people are not fixed. Psychology is not identity. It is state-based and influenced by environment and experience. This means behavior can change under different conditions. Intelligent thinking accounts for this flexibility instead of assuming permanence. Eventually, psychological awareness becomes intuitive. The mind begins to naturally sense emotional states and behavioral patterns without deliberate analysis. This creates a quiet form of understanding that guides interaction and decision-making. The core insight of this chapter is simple. To understand reality deeply, you must understand the mind's experiencing it. Because in the real world, intelligence is not only about logic, it is about understanding human nature. At Chapter 10, Discipline and the Engineering of Consistent Intelligence. Intelligence without discipline is like a sharp tool in an unstable hand. It can create insight, but it cannot create consistent results. This is where many people fail. They may understand ideas deeply, think clearly for short periods, and even gain awareness of patterns in psychology, but they cannot maintain it. Their intelligence appears in bursts, not in structure. Dangerously intelligent thinking is not defined by occasional brilliance. It is defined by consistency. Discipline is what transforms intelligence from temporary performance into a stable way of living. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction or pressure. In reality, discipline is design. It is the structure that allows the mind to operate at a higher level without being constantly pulled down by distraction, emotion, or inconsistency. It is not about forcing behavior. It is about building systems that make correct behavior easier than incorrect behavior. Most people rely on motivation. Motivation is unstable because it depends on emotional states. When motivation is high, effort feels natural. When motivation drops, thinking collapses into laziness or distraction. This creates inconsistency in results. Discipline replaces this cycle with stability. Dangerously intelligent individuals understand that intelligence must be protected. Without discipline, attention scatters, emotions dominate, learning becomes irregular, and thinking depth is lost. Discipline preserves mental clarity by controlling inputs, actions, and habits over time. One of the core elements of discipline is repetition. The mind becomes structured through repeated behavior. Repetition is what turns conscious effort into unconscious ability. What begins as effort eventually becomes identity. This is how intelligence becomes stable rather than situational. Another key aspect is resistance to interruption. Every environment contains forces that pull attention away from focus. Discipline is the ability to return to focus repeatedly without emotional resistance. It is not about never being distracted. It is about not staying distracted. Dangerously intelligent thinking also requires consistency in learning and reflection. Intelligence grows when the mind is regularly exposed to new ideas and then given time to process them. Without consistency, learning becomes fragmented and shallow. With consistency, understanding compounds over time. A disciplined mind also controls input. What a person consumes shapes how they think. Constant exposure to noise, irrelevant information, or emotional content weakens deep thinking. Discipline involves selecting what enters the mind carefully, because input determines output. Another important part of discipline is emotional regulation in action. Even when emotions are strong, disciplined thinking prevents impulsive decisions. This does not mean suppressing emotion, but preventing emotion from hijacking direction. The ability to act based on structure instead of feeling is a defining trait of advanced intelligence. Discipline also creates reliability in behavior. A person who is disciplined becomes predictable in execution, not in thinking, but in action. This reliability is what allows long-term progress in any field. Without it, even high intelligence cannot produce sustained outcomes. Dangerously intelligent individuals use discipline to create mental space. When basic habits are controlled, the mind is free to focus on higher-level thinking, such as strategy, observation, and analysis. Without discipline, mental energy is constantly consumed by small inconsistencies. Another hidden benefit of discipline is reduced internal conflict. When actions are aligned with structure rather than impulse, the mind experiences less contradiction. This creates mental clarity and reduces stress caused by repeated indecision. Over time, discipline reshapes identity. A person stops seeing themselves as someone who tries to think intelligently and becomes someone who naturally operates with structure and awareness. This identity shift is powerful because behavior becomes automatic rather than forced. However, discipline must be intelligent, not rigid. Rigid discipline breaks under pressure because it cannot adapt. Intelligent discipline is flexible but consistent. It maintains direction even when conditions change. Dangerously intelligent thinking also understands that discipline compounds. Small, consistent actions create large, long-term changes. This compounding effect is often invisible in the short term, which is why most people underestimate it. But over time, it becomes the foundation of mastery. Eventually, discipline becomes invisible. It stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like normal behavior. At this stage, intelligence is no longer something a person activates. It becomes the default way they operate. The final truth of this chapter is simple. Intelligence alone is potential. Discipline is what turns that potential into reality. Without discipline, intelligence remains scattered. With discipline, intelligence becomes unstoppable in its consistency and direction. Conclusion: becoming dangerously intelligent is a direction, not a destination. Dangerously intelligent thinking is not a final achievement you arrive at and keep forever. It is a direction of growth that must be maintained. The moment a person believes they have become intelligent enough, their thinking begins to slow down. Real intelligence does not end in certainty. It expands through continuous refinement. Across this journey, a pattern becomes clear. Intelligence is not a single ability. It is a combination of systems working together. Awareness of mental autopilot, control of attention, depth of observation, structured thinking, continuous learning, emotional discipline, pattern recognition, strategic foresight, psychological understanding, and consistent behavior. Each of these is not separate from the others. They are interconnected layers of one mental structure. When one layer is weak, the entire system becomes unstable. When they are developed together, thinking becomes sharp, adaptive, and grounded in reality. The transformation into dangerously intelligent thinking does not happen through sudden change. It happens through repeated correction. Every time you notice an automatic thought and question it, intelligence strengthens. Every time you resist distraction and return the focus, intelligence strengthens. Every time you delay emotional reaction and choose structured response, intelligence strengthens. These small moments accumulate into a completely different way of thinking. One of the most important realizations is that intelligence is not about knowing more than others. It is about seeing more clearly than your past self. Comparison with others creates distortion. Comparison with your own previous thinking creates growth. Another key truth is that reality does not adjust itself to your understanding. Instead, your understanding must adjust itself to reality. This requires humility. The more intelligent a mind becomes, the more it recognizes how much it still does not fully understand. This awareness is not weakness. It is accuracy. Dangerously intelligent thinking also carries responsibility. Clear perception removes excuses. When patterns are visible, decisions become deliberate. When behavior is understood, consequences become predictable. This clarity demands ownership of choices instead of avoidance of responsibility. At its core, this journey is about control of mind, not control of people or outcomes. External control is limited. Internal control is where real power exists. A controlled mind can adapt to uncertainty, learn faster, recover from mistakes, and navigate complexity without collapse. It is also important to understand that intelligence without balance can become harmful. Overthinking without action leads to paralysis. Knowledge without application leads to stagnation. Awareness without discipline leads to inconsistency. True intelligence is always grounded in practical execution. The purpose of becoming dangerously intelligent is not to isolate yourself from others or to see yourself as superior. It is to reduce confusion, improve decision quality, and interact with reality more effectively. It is about clarity, not ego. Precision, not arrogance. Ultimately, this journey does not end here. It continues every day in small decisions, unnoticed thoughts, and repeated habits. Intelligence is not proven in writing or ideas alone. It is proven in how you think when no one is watching, how you respond when pressure appears, and how quickly you learn when reality challenges you. The final truth is simple. You do not become dangerously intelligent once. You become it repeatedly, through every moment you choose awareness over reaction, depth over speed, and structure over impulse. The end.
Kindly subscribe to my channel.